Twitter Files Part 7, Michael Shellenberger Takes Manhattan. I keep thinking that I'm going to get tired of these Twitter Files things, but because I read through most of the thread, and more of it just sounds like, okay, yeah, this is stuff we already knew. But then they throw in one nugget that is something brand new that makes each new edition of the Twitter Files relevant. And I got to give Elon some credit for crafting them that way. So now in Part 7, the big revelation, which we get at the end, I think at the third to last tweet in like a 50-tweet thread from Michael Shellenberger, we get the revelation that the FBI was paying Twitter compensation in order for Twitter employees to act as FBI informants. So Twitter is a paid contractor of the FBI. Twitter officially now, working on behalf of the regime, they are an FBI contractor. All of these Twitter employees were working as professional spies. They were not FBI agents, quote unquote. They were FBI assets. And their job was to skim Twitter and look through everything, including your DMs, to find any evidence of Russia collusion and report it to the FBI. And when they didn't report enough potential traitors to Russia to the FBI would get suspicious, and they would say, "Why aren't you reporting enough Russian traitors to us? We need more and more reports of people who are working for Russia, or spreading Russian disinformation." And the Twitter people, this is how bad the FBI is. The Twitter people were coming back to the FBI and saying, "We're trying as hard as we can, but we just can't find any Russian traitors. We're sending you anyone that we can, but it's just if there's no evidence, what are we supposed to do?" And the FBI was just like, "Just send us anybody." Essentially, that was what the FBI wanted. The FBI wanted scalps. They wanted anyone who they could smear as a Ruski. So that they could justify, I guess, internally within the FBI, throwing more resources at Russia collusion investigations and spend lots of time, spend lots of money, while not having to do any actual work. Not tracking down, serial killers or sex traffickers or, drug cartels or the mafia. No, the FBI was spending millions and millions of dollars just in compensation to Twitter employees, just for their Twitter assets. They were paying them millions of dollars in order to dredge up phony Russia collusion suspects. And so that's how down bad they were to find Ruskies interfering in our election. I have to say, it's quite remarkable. As hard as they were looking, they just couldn't find it. You know why? Because it doesn't exist. Because we're not Ruskies. But anyone, I'll tell you the big secret here. Anyone who disagrees with the established official narrative on any issue in the news, whether it be the JFK assassination, we're seeing that a lot of that pop up recently, whether it be 9/11, weapons of mass destruction, the war in Yemen, supporting Trump, basically believing the intelligence community 100% of the time and never questioning anything they say. If you step beyond the bounds of that very narrow plane of existence, you are a Ruski. You are a Russian asset. Because as we all know, what does Russia stand for? Russia stands for free thought, freedom of speech, questioning authority. These are all basic, Russian political principles, as we all know. And so if you believe in those sorts of ideas, if you are at all skeptical when people on TV, when the man in the box tells you, "Oh, look, we've got these WMDs, and they're over in Iraq, and if we don't send, tens of thousands of troops over there right now, well, you're going to have a nuclear apocalypse, and Osama bin Laden is going to have his finger on Saddam Hussein's button, Oh, and now, 15 years later, 10 years later, we have to fund Al Qaeda in Yemen and in Syria. And if you question that, well, you're just a Ruski because Al Qaeda is against Russia now, don't you know? So Al Qaeda is the good guys. Anyone who questions that in any way is a Russian asset. And that's what I think these Twitter employees didn't figure out. That was who the FBI wanted reported to them. Anyone who disagrees with the narrative. That's what the FBI meant by Russian disinformation. And so make no mistake, I don't think that anybody listening to this probably needs to be told this, but the FBI regards you as the enemy. They're not hiding it. It's plain and simple. They put it right out there. And not just the FBI, the CIA as well, all of these people. The entire bureaucracy in D.C., not just the intelligence community, although the intelligence community, they are, I guess, the brains of the operation. But everyone down to your low-level staffer at the Department of Agriculture, they hate you to their core, or to your core. Not sure what the right way of wording that would be. They don't regard you as their equal. They don't even regard you as human. And so riddle me this. How does a country function when the regime which controls it has declared war on the vast majority? Because remember, this is something much broader than just Republicans. This is not just declaring war on Republicans. The FBI and the intelligence community more broadly is waging a war, and has been for many years, on any free thought. And at times, although in the past few years the left has been in lockstep with the official narrative, I think that is largely because of Trump derangement syndrome. Trump is someone as a character who will come and go. And one day, I think that many people on the left will find themselves on the wrong side of the official narrative once again. We saw this as early, in my lifetime. I can remember this in the early 2000s. The left, the popular left, the base of the left, your average Democrat, was on the wrong side of the official narrative. Hell, Alex Jones didn't used to have a right-wing audience. He was on, the more libertarianish spectrum. But there were a lot of people on the left who listened to his show because they agreed with him. They did not believe George W. Bush. And even though all of those same Democrats these days think that George W. Bush is a saint and an elder statesman, there will be new Republicans in the future, perhaps Ron DeSantis, who, as far as I'm concerned, is not someone who has proven himself to be uncorruptible as far as the deep state is concerned. Perhaps he becomes president, and, well, I don't think that this is likely. Let's just say he has a foreign policy akin to George W. Bush. If that is indeed the case, I think that you very well might see a resurgence of skepticism of the regime on the popular left. And in which case, the FBI's war, which is currently being waged almost exclusively at Republicans and Republican voters, that they will happily turn their attention to the left. In fact, the fringes of the left, what is the remainder of the anti-war left, certainly has been under as much, if not more, assault than the generalized American right in this new domestic war on terror. It's just that there are so few currently anti-establishment leftists left in America that you don't really hear too much about it. There aren't that many of them to take out, but they are still under attack, like us right-wingers. And so the battle lines have been drawn pretty darn clearly. You're either with the regime or you're against it. I didn't choose this life. I didn't choose to become an enemy of the state. The state has made me an enemy. They have declared me and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of other Americans to be enemies. So when any government tries to rule over its enemy, that is not governance. in the traditional sense. That is an occupation. We are currently living in an era of reconstruction, but it is not reconstruction of a handful of states that had rebelled and, have been forcibly brought back into the Union. No, this is the reconstruction of the minds of hundreds of millions of Americans across all 50 states. This is a reconstruction not of, statewide governments, but of the minds of individuals. That is what they're attempting here. It's far more aggressive than what they did back in the 1870s in the wake of the war between the states. During the old era of Reconstruction, the Union interfered in the domestic politics of the southern states in order to install pro-union and anti-slavery governments. But popular opinion was not something that they could really change. They couldn't make the people of Alabama or Georgia or Florida love having a Republican governor. But in the 2010s and the 2020s, what the federal government is trying to do is not only impose a particular kind of regime upon you, regardless of what elections say, regardless of what the public thinks. They are not only using their power to manipulate elections through their own disinformation campaigns, such as the Russia collusion hoax, but they are trying to go after each individual who strays from the allowed way of thinking. This is not something that healthy regimes attempt to do. This is something that regimes which are dying attempt to do. These are death throes. I'm not one for pop culture references, but I was just watching something and it reminded me a lot of our elite. It was a anime adaptation of a visual novel from about 15, 16 years ago, I think it was called Utawareru Mono. And the political elite, which was basically the emperor in this story, had an attitude that was exactly how I think of our own elites. He thought, very simply, that he is the emperor, he's the government. I am the country. And if the people don't like me, that's their problem. They will be made to like me. All I have to do is command them to like me and to do as I say, and everything will work out for me in the end. And so the emperor, when people disagreed with him and they resisted his tyranny, they rose up against him in protest, and the emperor just decided to massacre a village, make an example out of them. Not even one that had resisted him. Just a random village. He hurt people, killed people, women and children, to set an example. And what happened, lo and behold, more villages started rising up. Because they knew, you know what? You can't comply your way out of tyranny. It doesn't matter whether you're loyal to the regime or not. The regime will come for you at some point. And so the emperor, he ignored this. He just commanded his subordinates, oh, just go suppress them. Go use more force. Tighten the screws on the people. And everything will work out in my favor in the end because I'm the emperor. I am the government. I am the state. And what do you know, before long, the commoners were beating down the gates of the imperial city. They were storming the palace, and still the emperor was sitting there, with his opium pipe or his hookah. I couldn't really tell what it was. Completely unfazed, because he had total confidence in his own legitimacy and his own supremacy over the populace. And it was only moments later, without ever realizing it, that he was killed. He was overthrown, never having come to grips with his own mortality. And I thought that this depiction of this fictional, Oriental emperor, it reminded me so much of modern America. At all levels, the regime makes no attempt to try and appease the people. It doesn't try to hide its contempt, just like this man. They were proud of their contempt of the people. They were engaging in social capital consumption. All of the goodwill and all of the power that had been built up by great men in establishing either this fictional empire or the United States gets consumed by later generations who don't understand how it was built, and so therefore cannot understand how to maintain or expand it. The current crop of bureaucrats and elites who wander the halls of Washington, D.C. don't understand the history of the United States. They don't understand the political dynamics of the United States. All they understand is that they are in positions of power, and therefore 350 million people must pledge fealty to them or be destroyed. And so I by no means think that the United States is on the brink of collapse. This is a process that takes a long time. This is not, a simple tale of fantasy where you can condense the collapse of a regime down into a few hours. This is a story which will continue to unfold, but I think that the end result is pretty clear at this point, because no one is in a position to alter the course of American history as has currently been charted. The regime is its own worst enemy, and I don't think that it will be too many more years before the FBI is as hated as the Stasi were in 1980s East Germany. Because the FBI of 2022, or soon to be 2023, is in practice far more dangerous than the Stasi ever were, because they have so many more tools at their disposal. The Stasi did not have the internet. They did not have social media. They didn't have access to the NSA's massive data archives. The Stasi had to do things the old-fashioned way. They had to bug people's apartments. They had to have guys sitting in vans, wearing headphones. Old-school spying, not the lazy spying of today, where the FBI merely harasses employees of a social media company and demands that they rat on somebody for something. And there is no crime that the FBI takes more seriously than dissent. I guess I would have, after reading all this, I would have questions for, let's say, what is a mainstream conservative at this point? I was almost going to say I would have questions for mainstream conservatives, but I don't even know what that term means anymore. But let's just say people who agree with us that there are issues, that the FBI and all these other agencies, that the federal government is out of control, that they have made us into their domestic enemy. Let's say like a Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles type, the Daily Wire folks that aren't Ben Shapiro, because let's just ignore Ben Shapiro. But I think that those two, they're a good proxy for a certain sect of the American right. And these are people who think, we must gain power and therefore use power to right the wrongs against us. And to a certain extent, I think that DeSantis is viewed favorably amongst this sect of the right, because he has done that to a great extent. He was elected governor of Florida, and then he used his power as governor to do things to benefit his voters. He was able to successfully push the Florida legislature to the right and get certain things passed that you wouldn't normally see. Let's say in a place like Arkansas or Georgia or other places, that have had Republican trifectas for a long time, but just are run by politicians who have nothing but contempt for their voters. And so these same sorts of people, their strategy at the federal level is to essentially do the same thing. Elect, a Republican president who can essentially take power, take control of the regime, and use it to benefit the right. I asked him, after looking at all this, considering that all this stuff that we're seeing from the Twitter files went on when Donald Trump was president. How do any of them plan to use the organs of the regime to benefit the right? The regime's very existence is a threat to the American right as it is currently constituted. You can't just pass a couple of bills, or laws and fix this. You would have to abolish the regime and start over, or strip the regime down so much that it is unrecognizable and is essentially a new regime. And we've had this in multiple periods throughout American history. Technically, the American government that we have today, traces its origins back to 1776, or if you want, you can even say the ratification of the Constitution, which in and of itself, in my opinion, constitutes a regime change. But most people say, hey, the United States founded July 4th, 1776. That's when we celebrate our national birth. But over that period, we've had multiple different regimes, essentially, in practice, that have controlled the United States. We had the Articles of Confederation, and then the Constitution was a coup, an overt coup against the original government of 1776. And then you can make an argument for different regimes, technically, in the 19th century. Some people would say that the rise of Jacksonian democracy could be seen as a form of regime change, where the federal government was something substantially different from what it had been in the years prior. And then certainly, I think that it's easy to make the case that during the 1860s, there was a regime change in America, and that the United States of 1859 was not the same United States of 1866. We had a completely different monetary system. We had a very different idea of the role of the federal government. We had a national standing army. It was a very, very different government than the one which had existed prior to the Civil War. And then certainly, if you only want to make one more big change, there's no way to ignore the change which occurred as a result of the Second World War. America as we know it today was born in 1945. That's where this current regime was really born. That's when all of these institutions, gained the power that they have today. That's when the balance of power in this country shifted heavily towards the intelligence community and the military-industrial complex, the war state. That was a result of the Second World War. And ever since then, all of government has been subservient and subordinate to the war state. And so now that we're seeing quite openly the interests of voters conflict with the war state, we are seeing that complex shift its focus from foreign enemies to domestic ones. That's the background to what we're seeing in the Twitter files overall. So, either the war state will be able to subjugate this substantial portion of the population who it sees as a threat, or the current regime, which has existed since 1945 in the United States, will meet its end. But my opinion on this, I think, lines up with going back to that story I referenced earlier. The character, I can't remember his name now. It's either Benoit or Benabi. He was he was a military leader who was being ordered, of course, to suppress the uprising. And he appealed to the emperor and tried to make the case that, if there's this much of the country that's rising up against you, you kind of need to appease them. You need to make peace with them. You can't just suppress them. You can't just kill them, because without the people on your side, you don't have a country. You're just some guy. And in the end, Benabi or Benoit, whatever the hell his name was right. When all the people had turned against And well, who knows even if it was all of them. It didn't have to be all of them. It could have been just a substantial minority of them. When enough of them, when a critical mass had turned against the emperor, it turned out that he was just some guy. And he was killed just as easily as some poor villager. And so I don't want people to take this as a literal analogy. I'm not saying that there's going to be a second January 6th, at the J. Edgar Hoover building, and there's going to be people who charge in with torches and pitchforks and slay the director of the FBI. I'm not saying that's what the FBI is provoking. I think that in the modern world, for better or for worse, things don't work that way. I don't think that there has to be someone who storms the FBI and that changes things. Because remember, that didn't happen to the Stasi either until the wall was opened. The wall was still standing mostly, and people then did charge into the Stasi building and ransack it. And if the FBI continues down this path, that probably will happen to their building at some point after the collapse of the regime. But that will not be the cause of the collapse of the regime. That will just be, let's say, a garnish. Just like the death of the emperor was not the fall of the regime. The regime collapsed in this fictional story because people no longer believed in it. The state is a social construct. As long as people believe that there is this great power, this emperor, or this federal government who stands above all of us and whose orders we must follow, well, then the state exists and it has power over us, has power over our minds. But as soon as all the villagers decided, you know what, we're not going to listen to him anymore, all of a sudden he had no power. And at that point is when the state collapsed. The storming at the palace by that point was merely symbolic. They could have allowed the palace to remain. They could have left the emperor in his place, and life would have gone on with no one really caring anymore what he had to say. He could make all the pronouncements he wanted, but he would have no power. Life would go on outside of the castle walls. And many times over the past few years, I thought that might be how it ends for the federal government. Nullification. That's the principle here. And I think that leaders like DeSantis, that sort of attitude at the state level, is what would lead to that. Now, unfortunately, DeSantis has these presidential ambitions. I don't think at this point that the federal regime, as I've said, is savable, salvageable. Either you're co-opted by it or you're destroyed by it. I think it's clear at this point that the regime, largely because of Trump's own naivete and ignorance, arrogance perhaps, he got rolled. Trump went in there and he thought that he could use these people, and they used him. He compromised and did all these things, and guess what? They kicked him out anyway. It's abundantly clear. The FBI was telling all these social media networks, censor anything that's good for Trump. It should be, by default, regarded as Russian disinformation. And even the folks at Twitter were saying, we don't have any evidence that any of this stuff is coming from Russia. It just seems to be being shared by normal Americans and, perfectly, non-bot accounts. And the FBI was saying, doesn't matter. It had to have come from Russia. Or it has to be a Russian lie if it helps Trump. And so do I think that DeSantis would be as naive as Trump? No, but I think DeSantis would be someone who they would... you see, Trump wanted to work with the deep state. He wanted to be their friend. That's Trump's personality. They hated him so much that they didn't allow him to compromise. He thought he compromised. He surrendered, but they didn't put down their arms. DeSantis, I think, might be someone that they feel that they can work with a little more. They will try to co-opt him, and DeSantis may be amenable to a certain extent. He may, make compromises and things with them, try and form alliances with people in the deep state. But if he tries to take them on directly, if he tries to take them on harshly, I think it's clear at this point you're going to end up like JFK. The intelligence community is as brazen now, perhaps more brazen than they were in the 1960s, although I think that they're less powerful. But because they're less powerful, they're like cornered rats. And so at this point, I do think, and people said this back in 2008, I mean, when Ron Paul was running for president, like, oh, they couldn't actually let this guy win, would they? And the joke was, well, even if he won, they'd just kill him. And that used to be a joke, but I do think that's the case these days. Trump, they were able to suppress enough. They were able to handicap him because of Trump's own incompetence. Had Trump been a little more competent, maybe they would have killed him. They did everything short of killing him. They certainly subverted him at every angle, disobeying direct orders, waging wars in secret. But if you have someone who's smart enough to avoid all this, who comes in, guns blazing, outright, exposing the deep state, and I mean, if you look at the big pharma stuff, I could see DeSantis potentially, as the campaign goes on, jumping on this stuff, saying, you know what, the FBI is a problem, and we got to rein them in. Because DeSantis does what's politically profitable for him. He is incentivized politically in a pure, democratic republic. So this is sort of a thought experiment, because we don't live in a pure democratic republic where, people's popular interests actually decide the ways that, the results of elections. But close enough, that is still sort of, I think, to a certain extent, the assumption that DeSantis operates under. He's not that naive, but I do think that his main concern is trying to appeal to people to vote for him. And this kind of stuff is like red meat. But if he actually were to follow through, which, on a lot of stuff as governor, stuff that he didn't even campaign on, he has followed through on. He's done, I have to give him some credit and, benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, he's done a lot, he's done so much more than I would have ever expected. There's probably some things that he will do that will rock the boat if he were to be elected president. But I just don't see how his presidency would survive that. I don't see how he would survive that. And if the deep state does this twice in a row, if we get two presidents in a row that try to rein in the deep state and the establishment, and both of them are, as far as the voters are concerned, taken out either in the case of Trump by a soft coup, or in the case of, you look at JFK, it was a hard coup, but then, you had JFK, and then we had sort of decades of calm. You didn't have all this conflict between the deep state and the president for decades until Trump came along. And now we have the prospect that is the zeitgeist on the right. The right wants an anti-deep state president. DeSantis, if he's going to challenge Trump, is going to have to tap into that. So that means that if either one of them become the GOP nominee, and even less likely, if one of them becomes president, we will have another anti-establishment president that the regime will have to contend with. And doing it that much, if they take out two presidents in a row, I think that will just lead to more instability. It's not going to reinforce their position. It's going to weaken them even further. And eventually, they will reach a breaking point. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.